We're just gonna wait till we see that everyone's connected to audio. So I want to invite all of you to our conclusion session, the last one of Girl Up Edinburgh's webinar series entitled Exploring COVID-19's Intersectional Impact on Women and Girls Worldwide. We've had some incredible sessions over this past month run by Girl Ups across the world, and this session is going to be just like every other, just incredible and going to knock your socks off. So before we get started, let's go through some housekeeping rules. So, per usual, you probably have all heard this many times now. Girl Up will not tolerate any and all forms of hate or discrimination or microaggressions. If you are engaging in this event in an inappropriate manner, then you will be kicked out of the event. Please mute yourself on arrival. However, if you would like to unmute yourself and join the conversation with your, verbally, then you can do raise your hand feature on Zoom or privately message Abigail, who will raise her hand, and Marina, who will raise her hand, and myself. Hello. And so we really want this to be an interactive session and a super lively and engaging discourse. So that means engage however you want it in any way. So we want you to be messaging in the group chat and asking questions, sharing your experiences, and then, privately messaging or doing the raise your hand feature if there's a question or thought that you would like to share, add to the discussion. Just a reminder, this event is recorded. As always, feel free to show your lovely face if you feel comfortable using video. And please show the moderator, our speakers, and all of our people behind the scenes, as well as your fellow attendees, your utmost compassion and patience. So with that, now I think we're ready to dive in. So this interactive discussion is between myself as well as Karen Sugar from the Women's Global Empowerment Fund and all of you. So we're going to kind of start out, I'm going to give you a little bit of the overview and then we'll dive in. So I'm just going to start out giving a little brief summary of our discussion, and then we'll kind of get into the main subject of this conversation, which is talking about kind of the subconscious issues that, women have been experiencing during COVID-19 and outside of COVID-19 when we're talking about stigma, language, rhetoric, and all the different narratives. And then at the end, we're going to talk about, looking forward, what can we do? What actions can we take? What programs are successful? How do we define success? How do we make sure that we're not imposing our own oppressions and our own negative and unconscious bias on our programs? So with that, as you all have seen from our past sessions, we've had some incredible speakers. And, this session, we really wanted it to be an intersectional session. As, intersectional women, you face so many stigmas. And intersectionality really just is kind of as a lens which enables us to view how, different axes of oppression can affect and produce more worsen or different and unique features that look different for every person and every individual. So as, LGBTQIA+ women face stigma, as well as women who suffer from mental illnesses, women who, sexism and racism, and how all of, our systems and hierarchies of oppression all intersect. So we've seen, through our shadow pandemic, the first panel about domestic abuse, we even saw in that discussion how, how women face, cis women and trans women face a lot of stigma when accessing help, and how that stigma, changes depending on your sexuality as well. And the stigma of, being blamed for being a survivor, and then bringing in kind of like the semantics part of this conversation about the subconscious, even the language that we use, do you a victim versus a survivor, and, the importance of, using those different terminologies. we saw with Girl Up Buop and Girl Up Politicas, both in Mexico, about machismo and femicide, and about the, unconscious bias and power dynamics that are at play, and how when acted upon, they result in drastic and dangerous results, including femicide. We talked about with Girl Vow about how the stereotyping and the cruel inequalities that Black and brown LGBTQIA+ girls face in the school systems and the juvenile justice systems. We talked about adultification, all of these processes that aren't tangible but produce drastic and really horrific, terrible results that are tangible. So we talked about menstrual health in prisons and reproductive rights, and all of the stigma around menstrual health, and how power plays into that, and gender roles, and how women, being a part of security or not being a part of the security sector, as we saw with Itach Maki. So kind of that's been like a brief overview of this incredible webinar series. I'm just going to hand it over to Karen to just kind of introduce herself, but tell us about where you're coming from for this session, like what perspective, what context you're coming from, and as we've just kind of introduced ours. So that would be great.
Hey, well, I'm super happy to be here. I look forward to hearing people's comments and joining in the conversation and leading where I can and offering my experience and perspective. I'm the founder of Women's Global Empowerment Fund. I'm also an adjunct professor at University of Colorado. I teach gender studies. Women's Global is based in northern Uganda. So I've been there for 10 years. We work with, and it's in a post-conflict region in northern Uganda. So we work with women and families, providing economic, social, and political opportunities for women. Some of our most important focus areas are leadership development, menstrual health, and access to justice. So, in addition to food security, and we support women farmers, we've created an entire local food economy there, which is really critical for so many reasons, right? Having local food economies benefits everyone in the community: health, well-being, access to nutritious food. So that, talk about intersectionality, right? That all intersects. And when we talk about that, I think it's the most beautiful thing about this wave of feminism, or where we are at this point in the feminist journey, is that we've finally adopted intersectionality, because for so long we were kind of just focused on one issue, right? And we weren't inclusive, and someone was always left out, and someone was always winning and losing in that argument. And now I feel like the conversation is so broad. And you can see that in this series with the types of issues that we discussed, that it was so broad and spacious and expansive and inclusive. And that is the movement that we need today. Yeah. So I'm definitely happy to be here and talk about my experiences during COVID, what we've had to do as an organization to respond to what women and girls have gone through, which are many of the same experiences that women globally are suffering through during this pandemic. This pandemic has really pulled the curtain away from so many injustices that we all face. And you can't really view any one issue in a vacuum, because again, it's all connected.
Totally. Well, thank you, Karen. I think that was a great way to start off this conversation. So now we're going to kind of turn to the main subject, the main course of this conversation. So throughout our webinar series, we have seen that stigma is extremely gendered and powerful, that stigma is prominent when discussing menstrual health, mental health, reproductive rights, gender-based violence, and more. Furthermore, stigma plays a huge role in prescribing how individuals should act according to patriarchal gender stereotypes. For example, we all know the men and boys shouldn't be in touch with their emotions, or women and girls on their periods are dirty, evil, and natural, and therefore menstruation should be an unspoken topic. This discussion will investigate specific stigmas, how they operate, and who benefits from these pervasive stereotypes and labeling. We will consider the long-term impacts of such stigmas. Importantly and significantly in this conversation, we will identify key actors, the individual, family, community, and state, and analyze what the world would look like without gendered stigma and what actions these actors should take to get us to this world. And we'll also be focusing on how we contribute to these stigmas in our own lives. So just to kind of start this conversation off. So gender stigma affects all individuals, cis women, trans women, men and boys as well. So I was wondering, what are some gendered stigmas that you're familiar with, and how and why are you familiar with them?
Okay, I'll go. I mean, just because I work in the menstrual health arena in northern Uganda with women and girls, and I see that there's a lot of shame and stigma and embarrassment around their periods and even talking about it. But really part of the root cause of this is lack of education and knowledge. And that's why stigmas and shaming are allowed to continue, is because there's a lack of pushback, because there's a lack of education and evolution in those areas, right? Like once people, like what I've seen is that once girls and women are introduced to menstrual health in a positive environment without stigma, with medical information that's relevant and meaningful to their lives in a culturally appropriate way, right? Not a Western way, but what is appropriate in their culture. When that education process starts and that informational process starts, things change pretty rapidly. And I've seen that in other areas as well. So as, if we want to really talk about what the root causes of stigma are, I mean, we can talk about stigma and the obstacles to getting there. And really one of the biggest is education and information, which is used by the patriarchy to keep people in the dark, right? So it started with Eve, right? Her story and her being thrown out of the Garden of Eden and blamed and conniving and manipulative and all those same words that we continue to use today, often describing women, has lived in perpetuity. I mean, it's threaded through many of our discussions. So, you could say she was the first victim of, stigma, shaming, and misogyny, but
and like a patriarchal narrative. I mean, that's
right. That has really clung, right? I think that one of the beautiful things, I'll throw this out because I would love to hear what other people think. I think one of the most effective and highly impactful ways of challenging this is, sorry, working from home, people just ring your doorbell and you have a dog. Anyway, is art, right? The arts, like drama, the power of theater, the power of music, the power of poetry. And I've seen that working in like Nigeria and other places in Africa. Is that those are really powerful tools that have started to change that dynamic and started to challenge those entrenched patriarchal notions that are so antiquated. And actually, they're very hard for people to even hang on to. Even in the most conservative tribal meeting I've been in, these members know that they have a hard time hanging on, clinging to this. Okay, obviously I have to go for 1 second. So discuss amongst yourself.
Totally. I mean, something that I think is also important in terms of education is history. It literally is his story. And we're seeing that since, we're all familiar with the term, the winners write the history. So the history that we're reading in the classroom is, Eurocentric. It's, you know, not only is it Western and Eurocentric, but it's racist, it's sexist, and it's not necessarily showing the stories of all people. And I mean, specifically when we're talking about women's history, I mean, you have the argument that, oh, women weren't involved, they weren't there. And like, that's ridiculous. You know, they were there. Not only were they there, but they were writing under male pseudonyms. They were writing for, you know, husbands. So it's all like this subconscious. It's like what's underlying, you know, it might not be in our faces, but it's just these other elements. And yeah, so I was talking about history and education, but kind of going back to like talking about education, history, stigma, stereotyping. So like what actors are involved with this? You know, who are those who are creating it versus who are those who are perpetuating it? Or is that just like a chicken and the egg kind of dynamic that doesn't apply to this conversation? Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Karen.
I think men are creating it and perpetuating it. I mean, the social construction of race and gender is something that I've studied as a political scientist, you know, for years, and that has always existed. Who's in, who's out? You know, are you 2/3 of a human? Are you, if your mother is white, then you're considered white. If you're, you know, and that continues today. It's the lines are always moving on who's accepted. There's also who's telling the story, right? Who's telling the story and who has the biggest soapbox. So in today's media, who's telling the story is the sanitized news media, which is corporate owned and corporate run. So oftentimes we don't even get the full story unless we're really willing to investigate. And again, I think that's the power of art, the arts, because it transcends the traditional channels that we get our news, and oftentimes can break through. I mean, I think music and the power of music has been a really important tool in fighting racial injustice. I wish it would evolve into fighting, you know, sexual injustice, gender justice. We tend to, I feel like music hasn't quite caught up there.
We're just getting to kind of like the representation,
yeah,
like you know, that level, and then there's the whole other of like, you know, gender streaming music.
Right. So I think that's an interesting query to think about.
Yeah. So kind of just shifting back to our conversation about stigmas. So I'm obviously, this is, you know, to Karen, but it's to everyone else who's on here. And, you know, please draw on, you know, your own experiences. Before I get into this, I'm just going to read what Sarah said. She goes, even if women are given representation, they're mentioned with such amusement, like something out of the ordinary. Like when we think of warriors, rulers, historians, the person having the central place, it is always assumed that it is a man. And altogether, there's no mention of sexuality or other forms of representation. Sarah, you are just hitting the nail on the head. You know, the women who are able to break the glass ceiling are, you know, seen as a unique, you know, figure who it's not attainable for everyone.
Extraordinarily courageous in some way, right?
Look at the superwoman.
Right.
Yeah, it's so true. And so and I think that functions to also like increase the competitiveness between women ourselves, and that can like also lead to us perpetuating these stigmas and these stereotypes onto our sisters. Michelle raised her hand. So Michelle, let's take you off mute, and if you want to add anything to this conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that also language has a big play in it, as a lot of our narratives are in English, and it's almost like if you don't know English, then you can't really be with the socioeconomic status of some form. And then even if you do have it, then there's another thing. So it's that competition where, okay, after you have English, then you have to do the next thing, then you have to do the next thing, then you have to do the next. And then it's almost like, when do you stop? Like when do you just stay still? And And actually, I'm going to be talking, I just wanted to share with everyone here that I'm part of Girl Up Quebec in Canada, and also we're going to be having a sustained activism series that's coming up. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you for that, Michelle. That's super important.
I'm going to take that for a second. You know, working in Africa, which is a post, you know, many of them are post British colonies. And, you know, colonization was extraordinarily brutal. And one of the tools they used was to take away their language, right? Their history, their culture, to really quash that. And the formal language of Uganda is English, continues to be. And although there's 49 other languages, and in the tribal areas where I work, you know, English is a luxury, right? So everybody wants to learn it though, because they know, like Michelle just said, they can't participate if they don't know English. You cannot go to law enforcement. You can't go to the bank if you at least don't have basic English skills, which is so discriminatory and so elitist, right? And just puts a really big obstacle in front of women that oftentimes haven't had the opportunity to have a basic education or finish that. So our literacy program is huge. It's something that we're really committed to. We've had 10 years of it now. And watching the self-confidence, the self-esteem, and the opportunities that women have, we do teach it in English, and and they can learn English, but they also learn their language, their cultural language, their indigenous language, which is luau. So it's really interesting, but it's, you know, I had no idea that language was such an elitist activity, right? And it's really disheartening. And it's something that we, being in America, we don't even consider that, because we think English should be spoken everywhere, and we've made it very difficult to speak other languages, even, you know, even in other countries. Mm-hmm. So when you look at, you know, former countries that were colonized by the British, English is still the formal language of that country, whether it's indigenous or not, and it's 60 years later. Wow. So those are hard things to break, and that is really true.
Yeah, those barriers that women face, it's a lot. So Fatima, would you like to share a little bit?
Yeah, I wanted to introduce myself first, if I'm allowed to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Fatima. I work as a domestic violence victim advocate with the YWCA in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. I wanted to touch on the problem of menstruation in Islam, and how girls are treated, especially during the month of Ramadan. I remember when I was growing up that I was like hiding that I am not fasting, because women is given a break during that month when she's in her period, or their period. So men, for us, should not know that. It was so shameful for us to share that we're not fasting because we're in our cycle. So that if we go to the Islamic studies and we learn more about Islam, it shows that it is a break that is given to women to take from fasting because of what she's going through. She's going through pain, back pain, stomach pain, all that. So God gave us that break so we can proceed with our prayers, when we feel in our utmost health. So I just want to show that and share that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, now somehow we have to break that cycle of shame around that, right? And then you can like have full participation even during your period. Like you don't have to be shameful about that. But you know, many women hide that even from like their husbands of many years, have no idea what's happening every month. You know, they hide everything, and you know, and then the other extreme is some women are shamed and they have to stay somewhere outside of the home and they can't cook and they can't. That's a really extreme example. But you know, one thing that I learned about the story of Adam and Eve being thrown out of the Garden of Eden is that some religions, including Islam, actually gave equal fault, if you will, to Adam and Eve wasn't demonized in the same way as the Christian faith, which really demonized Eve. And I think the Jewish faith and I think Islam it had, the story was a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, you know, when we're talking about, you know, institutions like religion and kind of like their role in challenging or perpetuating, but also in terms of like values. That's, you know, that's also interesting. So I'm Jewish and I grew up and went to a Jewish high school, and what we learned specifically about abortion was like there was one specific line in the Old Testament for Christians and the Tanakh for Jews, and it was saying, you know, something about how the woman falls, if a woman who's pregnant and falls, you know, you save, in Judaism, they interpret it as, you know, you save the woman. And then in Christianity, they interpret it as you save the fetus. So it's really interesting, you know, how interpretations of text, whether or not, you know, the texts are problematic or not problematic. Right. Sometimes they're not, but how the interpretation, so how man takes it over and chooses how they're gonna concoct it, and then, you know, how they're going to maintain their superiority and their power by pushing out these stigmas, these stereotypes, these ideas. I mean,
these narratives. You know, Mary Magdalene wasn't a prostitute until the Catholic Church saw that she was gaining so much popularity, and they were afraid that she was going to have some sort of powerful role in the religion and the revolution and the control of the population. And so they kind of recreated this story in Catholicism that she became a prostitute. It was like, when I learned that many years ago, but I was still a grown-up, I was like, what? Wait, and people bought into that? Like now? Like knowing that? I don't even get it. But those narratives live in perpetuity. We are still dealing with those narratives today.
Yeah.
You know, having autonomy over one's body, that we still have to fight that fight every day, that during COVID, the United States was trying to set aside a woman's right to choose through manipulating language and laws and using code as a justification to deny that. If it wasn't for the legal system and some judges, you know, women in certain states in the South mainly wouldn't have had access, which they already have limited access. But, you know, they were trying to make it so women would be forced, because there's such that small window. You know, you can't, it's not a matter of waiting months or years until this virus passes. And they were trying to set aside a woman's right to choose during COVID. And it was really sinister and nefarious. And I feel like we all have to be so mindful of what our government is doing in our name and what our government is doing when we're distracted. Right? And the world is so distracted. And not every government is functioning like the United States right now. So I'm not lumping everyone together, but I think it's always important to be really aware of what your government is doing when something like a pandemic or a natural disaster is happening.
Yeah, totally. And Karen, I'm glad you brought up like the idea of time in this conversation, because, you know, time is something that just exists. You know, humans can't really control it to a certain extent, you know, that the clock will change no matter what. But when we're talking about reproductive health and reproductive rights, sometimes time, you know, time is of the essence. And from what we heard from a few days ago, discussion with Sharon from
Native.
Yeah, from Sharon from like Native American reservations, you know, they have to drive hours, like 7-8 hours to just get to a clinic. There's, you know, one abortion center. one clinic. But not even about that. I mean, I kind of want to go to like these lower levels, because that's very, that's kind of a very straightforward, that's a patriarchal, that's a patriarchal act. I want to look at, the 24-hour waiting periods, before you get an abortion. So, and how they're, in the UK, how birth control is free. However, birth control requires a consultation, and it's a behind the counter medicine. Even though all other, menstrual health, all of their sexual accessories, they're all over the counter. So we're seeing how, there are these restrictions. It's like some type of control over women and their actions. Absolutely. So I just want to go to our chats here. So we have a chat that says, just to quote from book Liberating Life, Women's Revolution by Abdullah Öcalan, within the matricentric constructed around these women, that's what matricentric means, Zagro's Taurus system, Mesolithic and subsequently Neolithic society started to develop at the end of the fourth glacial period, around 20,000 years ago. This period constituted a wonderful age in the history of our social nature. Many developments that are still with us can be traced back to this historical stage: the agricultural revolution, the establishment of villages, the roots of trade, and the mother-based family, as well as tribes and tribal organizations. And Azar Rodhin, you're right on track. So, I mean, I remember the When Home Isn't Safe, run by a girl at British Columbia, Angela Marie McDougall, talked a ton about how a lot of many Native American tribes and communities were also matricentric, and the women were matrilineal. All the women would live in the same, the families would live in the same area, and the husbands would leave the house and go live in the wife's house with the wife's family. And then she talked about how colonialism and the British and the French and the Spanish kind of came in and instituted their own manner and split up the women, split them up so that they were all in like their separate areas, and then concocted this idea of the white picket fence to like literally picket and fence women in to be isolated and separated from each other. Yeah, and then
history's brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, the European occupying powers, imperialism, is basically dismantled indigenous communities and matricentric communities and anything that went outside of Christianity. I mean, guns and Christianity, that changed the history of the world and created who we are now, really. And I mean, it's really sad. There's so many beautiful indigenous communities and cultures and value systems that we don't even learn about, right? There's something that only if you really do your homework, only if you really investigate, do you even get a sense of what's possible, or what was possible. It's almost like they not only did they dismantle those, they also, snuffed out the history of it. Yeah. From being available, right?
Yeah.
Which is intentional.
Yeah,
right?
they've silenced it and then dismissed it and kind of made it so small that, and you can't even find the history. So kind of connecting to what Fatima had mentioned earlier, and our chat from Soonbal, so nice to see you. So I'm Muslim, and yes, it's considered compulsory not to talk about your period with your male peers. In case of my household, my mother made sure that me and my sisters were embarrassed to talk about it in front of our brothers. And the thing is, my brothers are totally cool about it. You just have to talk about it and educate people about it.
It is. Change is so hard, but I've seen it. I've witnessed it. And it's like, you just have to put it on the table and start the conversation. And then it really is amazing. So like our Healthy Periods initiative in Northern Uganda, we just started including boys in the conversation. And we have like a local doctor that goes, and our staff goes and drops off menstrual products, sanitary products every month to schools across the region. And we just started, and it's sometimes the only time girls will get to ask a doctor questions. And so it's a stigma-free environment. All of my staff are Ugandan. I don't have white people working for Women's Global over there, there's no white savior kind of idea behind this. It's all indigenous, like people that work in their communities, that have lived there, that are invested and understand the culture. But we just started including boys who knew nothing about this. But it was so sweet because these two boys wrote these letters saying that I had no idea what my sisters were going through. But now when I see this happening, I help them. I'll give them my sweater and take them to the infirmary, you know? And it's like, again, it's change is painful and it's hard and it's slow and we're so impatient, but it really can happen. Right. And I see it. I think that's why I'm hopeful, why I can continue to do this work, is because I see the changes.
Yeah, it's like, you know, gender equality will only be achieved once gender is seen as a human rights issue, not as a women's issue. You know, racism will only be solved when it's seen as a white people issue instead of on the shoulders of Black and brown individuals. So kind of just going to our chats here.
Yeah.
Hannah, so nice to see you again. She goes, yeah, the stigma won't be broken if boys aren't included in the conversation. So true. So then we had kind of, I mean, Michelle, you're on the call, so correct me if I'm wrong, but your question was for Karen. So do you align with them? How do you work with them? So like, how do you work with kind of the indigenous, with like your local communities in creating?
So how I set Women's Global up, my intention was never to go into other countries and be a white Western organization there. So I go in and partner with a community-based organization already on the ground. And we have an understanding, an MOU, whatever, we work together. So I've been working with my program director since 2007, since our pilot project. So a long time. And he's a man, which I wasn't really looking for necessarily to hire a man, but he's been amazing. And having men involved in the conversation has been ultimately so helpful in navigating some of the issues. But, so I have 8 other staff members, and again, they're all young Ugandans who have gone to school in their country and are looking for work. And that's part of the model, is to like employ local community members that are looking for work. One of the biggest challenges in Africa right now is they're turning out a lot of people from universities and colleges. There's no jobs. And so it's really important. And plus, I only know what I know in my life experiences, so I can evolve and grow, but I want to be a good partner. So that's kind of the relationship we have, is I can raise money here for the programs. I can develop programs because I do have an expertise in gender and development, but we work together to implement them. And I'm only on the ground there a couple of times a year for a few weeks, for strategy meetings and staff meetings. So we work on that community-based, grassroots level, kind of under the radar of the government whenever possible, and work with other community-based organizations in the area as well to really get our work done. So we, work with other legal aid organizations for our Access to Justice initiative. We hire a newly graduated doctor from Gulu University every year to work with all our Healthy Periods initiatives while they're looking for their forever job. And we're part of the NGO forum there. So I'm kind of just, I have a specific role, and it's amazing, and it's a privilege to get to be there and witness all this and be a part of it. But it's definitely a very grassroots community-based organization.
So Karen, just kind of going further on, your WGEF's work. So, I mean, in the programs that you have, how do the programs challenge these patriarchal gender roles? And
just by being there, right? So like we have a micro enterprise program, which is kind of the cornerstone of our program, which is something I created based on best practices. So I'm not a huge fan of microfinance, but when it's done well, it can be good. When we first opened our doors, we had a lot of pushback. And we had a woman, and she tells this story beautifully if anyone wants to see it on our website. But she talks about she joins our program, goes into the market. Her husband drags her home because her in-laws and her husband are just outraged that she is doing this. But she goes back the next day because they're hungry and there is no other way to feed her family. We're talking about a post-conflict region that's very vulnerable, very tender. There's not a lot of opportunities. And she has run for office twice. She has a farm that is a very successful agro project. She has several businesses. Her husband is one of our biggest fans now because when he saw, and this is a very common story, when he saw that his life was improving, some of the pressure was taken off of him, that there was food on the table, that kids were going to school, and that Women's Global and the program on the ground was not trying to diminish him or change the dynamic, just the economic circumstances, right? And the opportunities. And she went on to take lots of opportunities. Like she went on to be head of our peer counselor. She went on to run for political office. But I think that sometimes we don't give them an opportunity to change, right? And it's like, I think that a lot of times my experience has been when everybody is treated with dignity and respect and no one's left out of the conversation, you can make those inroads and you can create change that is sustainable.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I just put this in the chat, but like, I mean, going off of what you were saying, it just reminded me of some stat that I have found that if women played an identical role in the labor market to men, as much as 28 trillion or 26% could be added to global annual GDP in 2020.
And if women were just paid equally as well, there's a huge economic boom. And I think that, sometimes, I mean, working in a post-conflict region was challenging for many reasons, but it was also a brilliant opportunity because the region had been so decimated by violence and poverty that people were really looking for a new way forward, right? And they knew that women had to be a part of that program. So like we had some tribal leaders that loved us. And one of them, my very first trip there, we were at his house. His wife was in our program, and he still goes to bat with us because, of course, there's always a few male leaders that want nothing to do with women's empowerment, want nothing to do with changing and evolving and creating equality or equity in their communities. But those are getting fewer and fewer and fewer, right? And so you kind of see that change.
Well, I mean, this has been, this has been great, fabulous. I love speaking with you, as always. But just kind of going to our second part of this conversation, kind of like what can we do, like circling back to, your career, how can we as individuals advance change? What programs work? I mean, what advice do you have? Also just a reminder to our audience here, if you would like to ask a question, share a thought verbally, please just private message Marina, Abigail, or myself, and we will put you off mute, and then you can engage in the discussion that way, but that's always open. So
please ask questions.
So
please
Karen,
share your experience.
So Karen, what can we do?
Wow, that's such a huge question, but organizing in your own community and getting involved at the community level is really important. Be an escort at your Planned Parenthood, your local Planned Parenthood clinic, get involved with the ACLU, work globally to share your insights and your energy, intern in our office in Gulu, Uganda for a while. It's like bigger than that. It's no one is going to give, what did Gloria Steinem say? No one's going to give you power, you have to take it. If we want to change the story, then we have to be brave and courageous and create a sisterhood that brings everyone along, right? All the time. Like you have to. And it sounds so pie in the sky and idealistic, but it's true. And I feel like, although it is really hard, I mean, vote. I don't, there's a spectrum of things that you can do to help. And, I worked in a shelter in Atlanta, Georgia for 6 years, and it was a shelter for newborn babies and their families. And I had some junior league volunteers that would come in once a week, and they were highly inappropriate. I mean, they were wearing furs and jewelry, and they were coming into a homeless shelter with women who had just had a baby and usually had other children. Everything they owned was in a pillowcase. It was like mind-numbing that somebody would be so tone deaf, right? So as the program manager, I had to sit down with them and talk to them about being appropriate. But they told me that they felt like maybe they weren't making a difference, and they didn't feel thanked enough by the moms at the end of the night when they were doing childcare. Anyway, one night a week, they would come in and do childcare. And what I told them, and it's very true, if you read to a child for 15 minutes, 30 minutes and show them kindness, that matters. That matters as much as me starting an international development nonprofit, taking all those risks, and it's like, that's equally as important. It's different, but it's equally as important. And you don't know where the ripple in the water is going to go with that child. And so never underestimate the power of giving someone on the street who needs a freaking meal some money. Like even if I have students like are so opposed to that, and it always really pisses me off because they're like, they're going to buy cigarettes. And it's like, well, if that's what's going to get them through the day, then whatever. You smoke, you have wine at the end of the day, you whatever. And the idea that poor people should, that we should impose some sort of behavior controls over what they can and cannot do. But my point is that, even if you ease someone's suffering for an hour or a meal or a day, it matters. And we can't ever get away from that. Sometimes I think we get stuck in this, well, I can't do anything big, so I can't do anything. Or I can't my vote doesn't make a difference, so I'm not going to vote. And, that's not true. It's not true. So I think everyone can make a difference. I think everyone can pull all of us up together. And it's not going to happen unless women take control of the narrative and control our destiny and bring everyone along with you.
I totally agree, Karen. I mean, just a quick thing, and then we'll get to Fatima. So I really think it comes down, take that opportunity or create that opportunity. Studies show that, men, they'll look at a resume, a job resume, like the career attributes, and they'll look at it, and if they match up with anywhere from 40 to 60% of it, they'll apply for the job. Women, we won't apply for it unless it gets to 80 or until we match it 80 to 100%. So take those opportunities, be courageous. Don't be
small. Don't be small. Ngozi Adichie, We Should All Be Feminists. It's a small book. It's like tiny. I don't know why it's that size, and it's very short. She's Nigerian. It's a really good book. We Should All Be Feminists. And in it, she talks about how women feel like make themselves so small sometimes to not interfere with like their husbands or their boyfriends, or not take away from them, or not diminish from their children, or not, whatever it is that we're okay with kind of being small or putting our wants and needs, aside for a while. And don't be small. Don't be small.
But also know that your actions that you might think are small aren't small, just as
yes. Yeah. Everything, the reading, everything I mentioned, it all matters. But just from a personal perspective, don't be small.
Yeah.
Don't let
anything you want to add to this?
Okay. I'm sorry. I wanted to add one more thing. I work with the refugees and the immigrants. So we know the unique barriers that this population face when it comes to domestic violence. What I've been doing is educating some women go by going to ESL classes and educate them about healthy relationship. And that played a big role in my role as an advocate in the community. I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen women who when I first met, they didn't know how to drive. They didn't know how to speak English. They didn't know a lot of things. That now they're taking their kids to doctor's appointments. They started driving and made sure to get their cars and start driving. And they're now looking for jobs, or they've already been employed. That is very important. And how you do that is to be involved in the community. Volunteer. Volunteering is the key. Go to schools. I am a certified medical assistant. I volunteer in every free clinic I hear all about. And I am out in the community. And when somebody is, when they meet somebody that is like culturally, you know, they're not Native Americans. They just know where to send them. They know who to call for these victims, either men or women. I've served both, but the majority of the domestic violence victims are women, unfortunately. But I feel like being in the community and volunteer in schools, volunteer with the refugees, volunteer with the what we call the underserved or the unserved population. Those where the women are suffering more because they're not working, they don't have an education, and that's where you need to go and have an impact. Your impact is very needed, and without having that urge and that selfless personality, you're just gonna sit there and wait for something to happen. It'll start with you. Yeah. If we want to have change, if we want change to happen, we have to start from ourselves and work towards the to have an impact and change.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up helping women with like basic services, like learning how to read, you know, or helping them learn to navigate everyday life, kind of. And the very first training that we did in Uganda with our members was human rights. Women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights, right? And most of these women, again, a post-conflict region, over 25 years, didn't know that they had these rights as being human beings on the planet, that they had a set of inherent human rights. And when you know, at the end of this training, there was a marketable difference in how they felt about their place on the planet, right? And you could see the change starting, right? So it's interesting. And then, you know, going into violence and doing educational pieces about gender-based violence and what the protections are, what the legal system protects them from. You know, again, that kind of information was life-changing for them, which is why we created the Access to Justice Initiative, because there are so many obstacles for women in the justice chain that are broken, right? And if you don't know what your legal rights are, what your human rights are, you can continue to be oppressed, right? So anyway, thank you for your comments, though, and your work.
Yeah, I think you both bring up really great, you know, ideas and different strategies, you know, of bringing, you know, your own passions, whether you're interested in arts and music, you know, or, you know, business, economics, about using, you know, your passions to advance gender equality. Because as we saw from last session on the reproductive justice, we saw that reproductive justice, you know, also doesn't exist in a vacuum. You know, everything is involved in that, you know, housing, food, economic insecurity, poverty. I mean, it all fits in together. So there are so many different ways to help and different avenues that it can sometimes feel overwhelming. And I think it also then on like the individual level of walking around and feeling, you know, like you have to on yourself change everyone else's perspectives on gender and what it means to be a woman. You know, it can be a lot of responsibility to hold on your shoulders. And I think that sometimes, you know, it shouldn't be our responsibility, right? But at the same time, you know, it's a constant fight. So I think, Michelle, you know, your thing on Sunday about self-sustaining activism is going to be, you know, really important. Yeah. So Karen, if we could just close off with, you know, just some advice you have to the next generation of feminists that are on this call here.
Okay, any other comments or questions though before we end?
Yes, so actually we do. So one from Azarodine, sorry if I'm butchering it. So he goes, I am Muslim with 2 sisters. One of them got married to a very conservative family since she is not allowed to go out of the house even without COVID. I think it will be great if you all women can share books or also motivate books that motivate or take control of her life and also help him on his journey on understanding feminism. So everyone get into that chat feature, start writing all of your favorite feminist books, your favorite literature, you know, fiction, nonfiction, it all. This is the chance. Let's help the sisters and brothers out.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my gosh. You know, I think that 2 issues that are so intertwined, are inextricably linked to gender justice are economic justice and environmental justice. And we really have to pay attention to those 2 things because we are disproportionately impacted by environmental degradation. And we have a shrinking world with shrinking resources and increasing poverty, and lack of consistent access to clean water is a huge issue for women globally, including Flint, Michigan, right? Like it happens everywhere, but you know, there are serious implications for women globally with regards to the environment. We really have to elect and support policies that protect the environment and therefore protect women's lives. And, you know, economic injustice, I brought this up in several of the series because, you know, talking about menstrual health and period poverty, you know, that is linked to economic injustice, right? It's crazy that Jeff Bezos is just, you know, worth $200 billion, like the wealthiest man on the planet. And women can't afford proper menstrual health products, right? And they are linked. I mean, that is something that we all have to be really mindful of as well. And sometimes it's really hard, like you said, to worry about everything at the same time. And then you get paralyzed and feel like you can't do anything. And really try and avoid that trap because there are a million things you can do. And you can email me and I will go over those million things with you. But it is really important to keep in mind the systemic apparatus that perpetuates injustice and disproportionately marginalizes and disenfranchises women, right? It's not by accident that it happens and that it continues to happen. You have to be really mindful of that. And what I love where I work in Northern Uganda is the activism, is how many women leaders we have. Over 500 women are serving in leadership positions across the region. And some of them still sign their name with their fingerprint, right? You don't have to be at a certain level to make a difference. You don't have to have, you know, a certain set of expected skill sets to make a difference. You can make a difference where you are right now.
Karen, I think that was a great way to finish, this discussion up. And, I'm getting kind of bittersweet. I've really enjoyed this whole webinar series, and to kind
You've done an amazing job.
Yeah,
really
just to
well
kind
done.
of get to a personal note, I just want to thank all of you. I mean, we're talking about these small, courageous opportunities, taking the opportunities or creating themselves. I mean, this was an idea I had in the middle of quarantine, didn't think it would go anywhere, didn't think anyone would want to show up, didn't think it would mean anything or make a difference. And then look at all of you. I'm sitting in a room with incredible people from around the world talking about issues that we wouldn't normally be talking about, creating relationships. You have no idea the impact that your actions will take. You really, really don't. And it's a beautiful thing. And so when you get in touch and are able to see how those actions, what the ripple effects are, it's beautiful and it's worthwhile. So
Wait, I have one more thing, Sharon.
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you really quickly because there's a chat that said menstrual products should be free, sanitary products should be free. And that is so true. And that's a human rights issue. And we should never forget that. And one of the things that I've said, again, in some of these series that in some of these events that I've attended is that, I want to organize with Girl Up in different cities and states in the United States and elsewhere about lobbying the elected officials and the government to create laws and to make sanitary products free in schools, in public restrooms, and for vulnerable populations, and hopefully everywhere. But it's going to take organizing
period poverty, like they did in Scotland.
And ending period poverty. I mean, I think it's such a lofty goal, but it's attainable if we organize and mobilize in meaningful ways. I think it's something that we could do together.
Yes. Well, on that note, this will not be the end of Girl Up. This isn't the end of Karen Sugar, and we are so excited to see all of you on our next adventure. And so thank you all for joining us. I mean, I'm sad to hang up, but this was lovely. Follow Girl Up Edinburgh on social media. Stay updated. We're going to have more webinar series coming up, more scholar series, maybe even a Black feminist scholar series, which is sure to be really interesting coming up in the fall. So follow us on social media. Follow Karen and WGEF on their social media. Stay in touch. And please reach out to any of us here. We're always in the mood for doing collaborations and partnerships and, extending all of our reach. So Karen, is there anything else?
Is my website somewhere on
It's somewhere on here. Also, to let all of you know, if you go to the website where you signed up for this event, we have Abby just put it in the chat, tiny URL, GU webinars. That will have the recordings to all of these videos so you can watch over them, rewatch your favorite parts, the highlights, and as well as all of the references, materials, resources, all of these book recommendations will all be on one document. Also, if you go on the website, you can join a Slack channel. If you want to, further the conversation on your phone, you can be messaging with, individuals from all around the world. We also have a blog, so submit to our blog. You can submit anything you want to it, art, music, writing. It can be about COVID-19's impact. It can be about intersectional feminism, or it can just be your writing, because amplifying other women's work is part of feminism, and that is feminist advocacy on a easy note. So, get into our inbox, message us, and we're really looking forward to, seeing you in the future and to ending the patriarchy together. So with that, I'm going to end the room, and this was lovely. Bye all.
Well done, Shira.
Thank you. Bye.